This is Sky News.
Murder arrest the former boyfriend of a Sydney model to face court 11 years after her death.
For sale, the government agrees in principle to put Medibank private on the market.
Hometown farewell, thousands say goodbye to an Australian icon.
And the end of an era. Australia's chairman of cricket selectors announces his resignation.
And the weather becoming cold, wet and windy through the southeast. Heavy rain and storms expected through the north.
Sky News 5 Live with Lee Hatcher and Sharon McKenzie.
Hello and welcome to 5 Live, 60 minutes of news, business, sport and weather.
Well, the family of dead Sydney model Caroline Byrne is relieved an arrest has been made 11 years after her death.
Gordon Wood, the man at the centre of the mystery, is facing extradition after being taken into custody in London.
And the former chauffeur of the late stockbroker Renee Rivkin will face court tonight.
It was one of Sydney's biggest murder investigations, connected to one of Australia's most notorious millionaires. Just after midnight, London police arrested Gordon Wood, a former chauffeur to the late Renee Rivkin and lover of Caroline Byrne.
The police investigation has been a long, tortuous and arduous path. It's seen 2 inquests, a great deal of publicity.
At 24, the Sydney beauty seemed to have everything to live for. She was already a successful model. But in June of 1995, her body was found at the bottom of a 30-metre cliff face known as The Gap in Sydney's Watsons Bay.
She was much loved, and for someone like that to meet such a horrible end, it's just really hard to think about.
Wood quickly became a suspect.
I find it hard to believe that she was killed, because nobody would have any reason to do that.
According to reports this morning, police claim Wood may have had every reason to murder Ms Byrne. She may have been about to end the relationship. The other alleged motive involved a business matter far more sinister. Wood may have given Ms Byrne incriminating information about a fire that destroyed an offset Alpine printing factory. It resulted in a $53 million insurance payout to Rivkin and other shareholders.
We're in the position now where we should be able to get the answers.
Wood is likely to be extradited from London in the next few weeks to face trial in Sydney.
The victims of a stabbing at a Melbourne birthday party 3 years ago are angry over the sentence handed down to their attacker. 25-year-old Mark Manillo escaped a jail term and instead was ordered to serve 200 hours of community service. Joining us now from Melbourne is Sky News reporter David Lipson. David, seems like a light sentence. What were the reasons given by the judge?
Lee, good afternoon. Well, Justice Jim Duggan conceded that indeed some people in the community may see this as a lenient sentence, but he also said that that the case, or particularly the brawl, wasn't a straightforward one. It occurred in 2003 at a 17th birthday party, and 7 people ended up being either stabbed or slashed, and several of them were quite seriously injured and had to be taken to hospital. But in the end, only one person was actually charged with this, and that is Mark Manillo. He faced court today, and he was only charged with recklessly causing serious injury. Justice Duggan said that it was possible at the party that other people may have had knives as well, and I suppose he meant that it was a little bit difficult to pin everything onto Manillo in that case. But this really wasn't enough to satisfy several of the victims who were also in court today. One man in particular who had to have his spleen removed after being stabbed said that he'd been given a life sentence because he had to be on antibiotics for the rest of his life, whereas Manillo got off almost scot-free.
Okay. Now, in other news today, Dave, the Bracks government's moved to block an attempt by a notorious pedophile to change his name.
Yeah, this emerged in newspaper reports this morning in the Herald Sun that Brian Keith Jones, better known as Mr Baldy and certainly Victoria's most notorious pedophile, wanted to change his name by deed poll to Sean Paddock, and this is believed to be an attempt to mock his victims, many of whom's head he shaved before sexually assaulting them. Now, Steve Bracks, the Premier, described this attempt as absolutely offensive before confirming indeed that his government would introduce legislation to block Mr Baldy from trying to change his name, and indeed blocking anyone else, any other sex offenders who are under such closely monitored conditions from changing their names as well. Lee?
David Lipson, thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you.
The Cowra abattoir at the centre of a row over the government's new industrial relations laws has done a backflip after giving workers the sack last week. 29 employees at the meatworks were given notice and told they could reapply for jobs on lower pay. But Workplace Relations Minister Kevin Andrews says the company will now withdraw the termination notices after its obligations under the new laws were pointed out.
The opposition has accused the government of ignoring the seriousness of the strain on relations with Indonesia. The Indonesian president has called for a review of cooperation with Australia after it granted asylum to a group of West Papuans. The Prime Minister says he's confident that the two countries will sail through their current differences with relative speed.
Another day, another foreign leader. The Prime Minister held talks with his Dutch counterpart today. It's 400 years since the Dutch became the first Europeans to land on Australian soil. Today's relationship will see the two countries join forces in a mission to help rebuild Afghanistan later this year.
Prime Minister, during 400 years we are good mates.
The two leaders also discussed the tensions over the former Dutch colony West Papua, which has been a part of Indonesia since the 1960s. Separatists there have long struggled for independence, and last month 42 of them were granted asylum by Australia. The Indonesian president has now described the decision as inappropriate and unrealistic, and says Indonesia and Australia should seriously sit down again and make sure they have good faith, honesty and openness.
Rest assured that I took careful note of that comment.
The Prime Minister says he can understand the sensitivity